One Fine Day by Merryn Allingham, read by Miss Worm. Richard's clothes still hung in the wardrobe 3 years after his death. They were neatly arranged in sections, suits down one end, shirts at the other, and in between casual jackets and trousers. Connie kept the clothes in impeccable order, freshly pressed and precisely buttoned, with a line of highly polished shoes gleaming beneath. She liked to look at the clothes every morning after she'd taken her own dress out of the matching cupboard. She would open Richard's wardrobe wide and breathe in the fresh smell of his clothes. Sometimes she would lovingly smooth one of the pinstripe suits or lay her face against the tweediness of a check jacket. Often she counted the hangers, as though to make sure none had escaped during the night while she slept in the large bed that stood at right angles to the wardrobe. Once a week, she would take out each item carefully, looking for any sign that the clothes might be falling below Richard's exacting standards. Perhaps the shoes looked a little dull, or a button had come loose, or worse, the first signs of a predatory moth had appeared and needed to be dealt with immediately. Looking after Richard's clothes took time, but since his death she'd found consolation in the task. Until recently, that is. Recently, she had begun to feel differently. She didn't know why, but the daily ritual had started to feel burdensome, and she was guiltily aware of becoming less and less eager to open the wardrobe doors. On this sun-filled June morning, the radio had promised a perfect summer's day, a day in which people would picnic in the park, eat their lunches at little umbrella-shaded tables, ride over the downs, and meander along lanes. She walked across to the bedroom window and opened it a few inches, unable to resist the pleasures of early summer, and yet conscious of Richard's injunction that open windows were a blatant invitation to thieves. But the sun's warmth flooding through the glass, and the breeze gently lifting the leaves of silver birches in the distance, made it impossible for her to do otherwise. She stood absorbed in the smells and sounds of a freshly given morning. Beneath her, the garden lay carefully contained, the grass immaculately mowed, the borders alert. Mr. Sykes the gardener came once a fortnight and still carried out Richard's instructions. Angles were preserved, lines maintained, foolhardy weeds instantly dispatched. But the weeds always seemed to return, the lines become blurred, and the angles softened. Ceaseless vigilance seemed to be needed, and she suddenly felt very tired at all the effort that went into preserving the order of this small patch. Richard had often said how important it was to maintain a civilised way of life, but somehow she had never quite understood what he meant. At the boundary of the garden, she noticed, the delicate green and white of hawthorn nodded over the fence, and the grass grew long and rich, in difference to Mr. Sykes, or his strimmer. She walked back to the wardrobe, ready to begin her customary routine, and had flung the doors wide when the telephone rang. She felt confused. It was Wednesday, and Flora wouldn't ring until Saturday tea time. That was the arrangement she had with her daughter. The open window and the telephone ringing so unexpectedly disturbed her. She hurried downstairs to answer it, her breath coming short and sharp. Distractedly, she smoothed the creases from her linen dress as though she needed to look her best for the surprise caller. The voice that came down the line confused her even more. Not Flora, for sure, but a voice from a long-dead past. A friend. A dear friend once, but now no really more than an acquaintance. Someone she'd known so well, been inseparable from in the years before she married. Such a long time ago it seemed. Judy. After all those postcards from around the globe, here she was in Connie's hometown, phoning from just a few streets away and asking her out for lunch. Judy and she had met working in the same office. They had been just two of a friendly bunch of girls, all much the same age, and all hoping for a life beyond the narrow confines of the typing pool. As a group, they'd laughed their way through each day, making light of the mundanities of office life. They teased each other mercilessly about their clothes, their mothers, their makeup, and of course their male conquests, real or imagined. And when the bad times came, they supplied one another with shoulders to cry on and handkerchiefs to mop up the tears. She could remember still how completely they had immersed themselves in each other's plans, how eagerly they had shared their dreams of a future with whoever was the current beau. Judy had been different, though. She'd laughed along with the rest of them. She'd been the biggest practical joker of them all, but stayed aloof from any conversation on men and marriage. While they were nervously picturing their husband who would sweep them off their feet, she was making her own very different plans. Judy wasn't the least nervous, and not the least interested in marriage. Her future would be hers, and hers alone. When Richard met her for the first time, he had thought her a very odd sort of female, and discouraged their friendship. Connie hadn't minded. She was in love, and her life with Richard stretched enticingly before her. In the years that followed, Judy had drifted to the margins of her world. The three of them had met at times in London for dinner, but these occasions had proved so uncomfortable that everyone was relieved when they were finally abandoned.
Connie, are you there?
She'd gone numb and struggled now to answer. Yes, she said uncertainly. I'm here.
So how about that lunch?
She was gripped with panic. She never went out to eat. She couldn't go to lunch, not without Richard. It was difficult even to remember the last time she'd been to a restaurant. He always preferred to eat at home. Fear overwhelmed her, and without stopping to choose her words, she blurted out an uncompromising refusal. I can't. The flat negative hung in the air for a moment, and then, deeply embarrassed, she tried to smooth over her unaccustomed brusqueness. I'm really sorry that I can't come, but it's wonderful to hear from you again. Judy's generous voice filled the telephone.
Oh, Connie, what a shame. I'm only here today and then up at London tomorrow. Couldn't you possibly squeeze me in? There's so much news to catch up on, and it's an age since we saw one another. Oh, I've been looking forward to getting in touch properly for such a long time.
Connie's limbs began to shake, and she had to clasp the receiver with both hands to prevent it falling to the floor. There was a pause which seemed to go on forever before she managed to say, Another time, perhaps, when you're back in England again. It's just that today I've got rather a lot to do, and I can't really put any of it off. She was appalled at how glibly she could lie, and to Judy, whose friendship she had once cherished.
Oh, I know you must be busy, and I'm a wretch to put you on the spot,
came the sympathetic reply.
I thought Richard must be retired by now and you'd be a little freer, but I expect you still do plenty of entertaining for him. You always were the perfect hostess.
Connie's chest tightened. How to explain about Richard? How to say the words that he was dead, and all she had to do today and every day was to check his wardrobe and make all perfect. The sun streamed through the decorative glass of the front door, bathing her face with light and caressing her hands in its warmth. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax. On the other end of the line, Judy was still gently persuading.
We don't need to make it a proper lunch, you know. We could go for a quick sandwich. Just as long as we have a little time together. It's a wonderful day.
Connie knew the place she would go. She could see it in her mind's eye. The tables spilling onto the pavement, waiters threading their way through the chatter, sunshine and shade, and above, the sky's perfect blue oval. She had often seen the cafe when she went shopping with Richard, and had looked with envy at couples enjoying their morning coffee in the open square, the red-checked parasols fluttering above their heads. But Richard didn't like to sit outside. It was too noisy, and the heat and flies were bothersome. She suspected, though, it was more that he felt threatened by the freedom of it, the danger of possible disorder. Out of nowhere, an image flashed before her. In her mind's eye, she saw the wardrobe, disciplined and battle-ready, squatting high above. It seemed an inanimate force, one she could not fight, but demanding constant attention and slowly devouring her energies. It was waiting for her, impassive and unyielding, and would wait for her through the long years ahead. Perhaps, after all, the wardrobe doors should stay closed today. Perhaps it was time to meet the world again, but this time for herself. "Judy," she said falteringly, "I think I would like to come."
What's that?
Her friend asked as the line crackled.
Are you saying yes?
Yes, I'm saying yes.
Oh, that's wonderful, darling. Best we meet in town, I think. I've not been to your house before, and I'd probably get hopelessly lost trying to find it. Do you know a good place to eat?
There's a small cafe on the square. It has red parasols.
The place with red parasols?
Julie confirmed gaily.
In half an hour?
Half an hour would be fine. She dropped the telephone into its cradle, feeling as light as air. Half an hour would give her plenty of time. She wouldn't need to change. The dress she was wearing would do for a casual lunch. It was a lovely blue, Flora had said, and if Judy was the friend she'd always known, she wouldn't care a fig what Connie was wearing. Now, where had she left her handbag? She made for the stairs again. In the bedroom, she paused in front of the great oak wardrobe. How many times had she seen Richard standing in just this spot, deciding exactly what he would wear that day? He had been so meticulous in his dress, meticulous in everything, but that had been in a different life. Lunch with Judy signified change, and it was change that she must embrace. Today she would close the wardrobe doors and walk towards a new world. She took hold of a brass handle and pushed at it lightly, but somehow the door resisted her. She grabbed the handle of the left-hand door and pushed harder, but there was still no movement. How very strange. The doors were carved from heavy oak, but she'd never before had a problem. Was she losing what strength she still possessed? She pushed harder this time, but the resistance persisted. Oh, there must be something inside stopping the doors from closing, she thought. She parted the rack of clothes and gazed right and left, up and down. Nothing. The cupboard was very deep, and she thought the problem must lay further inside. She half climbed into the space she'd made and bent down to look into each corner for any likely obstruction. Still nothing. But then a noise from somewhere behind her made her turn, and she saw a mass of wood moving towards her. The shaft of sunlight, caught in the narrowing gap at the top of each door, was very gradually being eclipsed. She became frantic, pushing wildly, trying to prevent the doors from closing, but their power was inexorable. The sunlight vanished, and the wood shut with a thud, and she was left in darkness. And what was that she could hear? A sigh of satisfaction.